Nick, welcome to the podcast. Fantastic to have you on.
Thank you very much. Good to be here, Chris.
I feel it's been long overdue. So let's start off by your background up to today. So I know you've had a really varied career over the years and you had a bit of a change of career a little while ago. Talk me through sort of how we've got to today.
Yeah, okay. My early career was in pensions, working for the electricity board. It was very exciting. And then into retail financial services, First Direct Bank, that kind of thing. And that's important as a brand because they were very insistent on not recruiting people who worked in banks. And they wanted to recruit people who worked in service and sales businesses because they wanted to bring a new dimension to UK banking. And that was way back in 1989 when they started. I joined in 94. And then I worked in a number of other financial processing businesses, building society, fuel card business, credit card processing, outsourcing, POS kind of activity, point of sale activity, that sort of stuff. And then I spent a couple of years in the wilderness, Chris. So let's put it that way, selling tax information to accountants in London for a couple of years, but that was utterly boring. So then I decided to do something entirely different and became an estate agent. So that was at the ripe old age of 44 by then. And I kind of thought, well, how am I going to do this? And chose the franchising route. I went along to a franchise show back in October 2013 and came across a couple of lunatics called David and Glenn who'd developed this EweMove business. So it hadn't gone live yet. So I was one of the first franchises in the UK opening up in York, and everything was a bit chaotic, as I mentioned. So we had no customer website, no marketing plan, no systems, no tools. We just had a really, really strong brand and a bit of direct mail content and a few direct mail door drop leaflets. That was about it. So without any estate agency experience and without really much support, off I went into the York market, which is hugely competitive, to try and build a business. And it took off from there with lots of mistakes and learnings across the way, I can tell you.
So why estate agency? Because obviously you had the career path in sort of the financial services, the selling to accountancy, that sort of direction. Why the change in tangent to estate agency? What kind of highlighted that to you as a good route to go down?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things that people say when I talk to people applying for a franchise. There's two common themes. One is, I don't want to work in corporate anymore. I want to do something for myself. And that applied to me 100%. And the other thing is, I've always loved property and I want to get into a property business. And that applied to me 100%. So that's a hugely common theme. And, the sort of traditional estate agents tend to start quite young of age, coming out of school. They don't go to university. They get a job in estate agent because they're good salespeople. They like the industry. They like the buzz of the business. EweMove tends to recruit people who are second or third careers, maybe a little bit older in the 40s. They've had, a life experience of buying and selling houses for themselves. They've worked in sales businesses, service businesses, all that, and they do bring a very different dimension to the estate agency space. And, I was the same. And what I found was, that gave me a very different sort of aspect, a different feel when I went to see vendors and talk to buyers as well. I tended to find through feedback from customers that I was having a very different conversation to the everyday estate agent conversation. And that's what enabled me to build EweMove York into the sort of top 10 player it was in a market of about 70 sales agents, about 30 additional lettings agents. So very, very busy, very competitive. And I didn't realize, because I didn't experience an agency, of course, that actually those conversations I was having was helping me build the business. And that was the key difference. So, um, it's just a different approach to what we do.
So you launched your agency in York, and as you mentioned, it was fairly, how can I put it, light with regard to systems and processes at that time within the EweMove network. How do you, yeah, you basically have a blank piece of paper in front of you. How do you structure that and go, actually, right, we need to make this work. I've changed career from sort of a successful career behind me. Now I've kind of, turned right and I'm now doing the estate agency side. How do you go from sort of zero to where you want to get to in that York market with no experience behind you? What's your first steps?
First steps is thinking, oh, heck, what have I done?
Panic.
And then when you get over that, you can sort of develop a plan. So, my business career has been one of business process re-engineering, selling, sales, service, all lots and lots of different things that I've done. Through kind of first level entry job to senior director job. So I've kind of done lots of stuff, and that's helped me undoubtedly in terms of thinking through clearly how am I going to approach this problem, and setting out a plan and a sequence of activities that you can repeat time and time again, until you can gain some traction. So, there's two key lessons there: is fail fast, which everyone's heard of before, which means if that planned process you thought about when you were sat around the kitchen table isn't working, well, change it. But if it is working, and you got the balance there is giving things time to develop and refine. If it is working, just do that more often and do it scientifically, do it consistently, and you will find you can build a business. So stick with the things that work and do more of that, and stop doing the things that don't work and do less of that.
So you mentioned earlier, mistakes you had made, and obviously you mentioned things that didn't work in the business. Or anything particular you can think of looking back that sort of didn't work, and in hindsight you would go, Nick, just avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily things that didn't work, Chris, but they divert your time and attention. So, for example, I would take a listing regardless of where it was. It could be 45 minutes, an hour drive away from where I should have been operating, so well out of the area that I should be developing. And you might take stock which isn't consistent with the kind of stock that you want to build up over time. So you got these outlying activities which divert you from your core focus. And one thing I talk to new franchisees about now in great detail is stick to your core area, stick to your core market, and don't be diverted with random things. I had a franchisee the other day saying, I'm struggling to sell a park home. And the question is, well, why are you selling it in the first place? That's not your core business. So don't get sidetracked by these things, which might appear, um, you know, good opportunities at first, but perhaps are not. And in the current market, the super high value stuff isn't selling. So let's focus on the stuff that is. Keep the area geographically tight, keep the property stock list tight, and become known for the kind of properties and areas that you want to work in, because that is where you will build traction, you'll build referrals and recommendations, and you can grow your business with board presence and all the things that you'll talk to your customers about as well.
Do you feel that's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy for lots of agents? So they almost get like a shiny object syndrome of, oh, I've got a new listing that's out of area sort of thing. And then they never really grow a core patch because they're always kind of chasing that next shiny object that is outside of their core area.
Yeah. Well, 100%, yeah. So, I mean, if you throw a huge rock into a mill pond, it ripples out. And that ripple lasts for a good amount of time. Whereas if you took the same volume of stone as gravel or sand and threw it into the pond, it would just scatter and disappear fairly quickly. And it's very similar with agency. So board presence is absolutely key. And over the years, I've spoken to customers who don't work in our business. They work in the medical profession, they work in schools, various different things. They don't know what agents do, how agents operate, and all this sort of stuff. All they know and understand is, can I see that agent selling houses like mine around where I live? And when I ring them up, do they answer the phone? And do they have a good conversation that gives me confidence? And that's what customers value. But often agents don't really realize that. They're just chasing, like you say, the big shiny things all over the place that makes them feel good. And they can say, oh, well, I've sold a nice big house over there. Well, that's great, but that's not going to be seen by your core consumer. They're not interested. What they want to know is, can you sell a house like mine? And do you make me confident that you can do so?
So talk me through sort of the next chapter of You Move York, because obviously you were a one-person band to start off with, or was it yourself and Sarah you started things off with? Talk me through sort of the growth over time and obviously where you kind of got to before you moved on.
Yeah, so I mean, it grew relatively quickly. The first couple of months, I have to say, were tricky because I was making lots of mistakes and learning things. So I didn't really get a lot of traction the first couple of months. But then once I realized what I was doing wrong and refocused my day-to-day plan, then things took off very quickly. So I was working on my own. My wife at the time was a mortgage broker, so I was just feeding her mortgage leads in the main. But I was having absolute great fun. And one thing, I do love about this business is this business, going through somebody's front door and not knowing quite what you're going to find until you get there, is absolutely great fun. I love that. But having those conversations with people, talking about what I could do for them and doing it, was great. And things took off really quickly to such a point where, I ran out of time. So there was a huge amount of opportunity to be had, but I did not have the time in the day to exploit that opportunity. So I then looked for other people to come and work with me. I built a team, and staying true to the EweMove process of having one person deal with the consumer from start to finish, rather than split the jobs across the team. So you got 4 or 5 people working on one property and one consumer. I split the geography into 4 or 5, and I had one person dealing with everything over here, another person over there. So we kind of split the geography up. So we all did the same thing and looked after customers from start to finish in those kind of sub areas of York. And that worked really well. And, grew EweMove York to a top 10 player, as I say, which is not too bad in a very splintered market. And the amount of business we then won from referrals, recommendations from buyers who came along who hadn't sold a house or were struggling to sell a house with another agent. They wanted to switch to EweMove because the experience I had as a buyer was so very different to the experience I had with other agents. And it's just about giving people the confidence that you know what you're doing and you can do a good job, and you can do a good job for them as well. And critically, which we may explore further, we're available when we pick the phone up and talk to people when they want to talk to us.
And how long were you sort of on your own for, inverted commas? So how long were you sort of a one-person band before you took your first associate or team member in onto business?
Yeah, so I started on the 1st of February, and it was before the year end that I was running out of time and I needed some more support. So as far as I can remember, I wasn't working on my own for very long. So Jonathan came in, Simon came in, a few others came in, and we built a good functioning team, and literally doubled our listing values year on year. Every year it's doubled from the year before.
And as you grew the business, as you brought new people on to join your team, how important was it to have sort of a you move York, inverted commas, way of doing it? So that obviously when they got to certain parts of the process, they kind of knew sort of, what would Nick do almost, and what would the franchise agreement tell us to do? How important was finding those processes sort of nailed before people came on board with the business?
It's absolutely critical. You've got to have a process in any business. So if you have a problem and you employ more people, you're just scaling that problem. So you need to iron out the issues and the roadblocks and the hurdles to make that process as super smooth and efficient as you possibly can before you start to scale, because otherwise you're just scaling a problem. So the simplest reference here is, the food franchises like McDonald's or Subway. You can see without somebody educating you that they have a process. So they have a product, so they have a process, and everyone does exactly the same thing, which is important for 2 reasons. It's important for the franchisor because you got something to sell to somebody who might be interested in buying a franchise. And it's extremely important to the consumer because they will choose that brand over and above an independent burger restaurant, for example. You go to a new town, fancy a burger. If I go to McDonald's, I know exactly what I'm getting. If I go to the independent burger place that I've never seen before, it might be great, but it might not be. So I don't want to take that risk. I haven't got time to worry about it. So having consistency across the brand is really important.
So let's fast forward a little bit. So obviously, the Glenn and David exited EweMove, and they sold the business, and obviously they kind of went their separate ways from it. And then the position came available for managing director of EweMove, the head shepherd role. So what made you want to apply for the job? Because it sounds like you were kind of smashing it in York and doing really well. What made you kind of want to apply for that position?
Well, when I stopped working in corporate world and started my own business, I swore blind that I would never work else ever again. But yeah, here I am. And the reason was, quite honestly, it was a protected move because I had built a really good business. And EweMove at the time, so this is back in 2017, was still misunderstood by the estate agency world at large. So no one really understood what EweMove was, how it worked, or anything like that. So I thought, well, if the PLC who'd acquired EweMove hires an industry veteran to come and run EweMove, it will kill it. And I didn't want to lose my business. I'm doing quite well, thank you very much. So I was actually tapped on the shoulder by one of the by David, actually, who sold the business to the PLC and said, "Look, Nick, I know you've got a good corporate background. You've done this sort of stuff before. Why don't you talk to the PLC about the role?" So I did, and there was about 100 applicants for the role, went through a fairly rigorous assessment centre process, and I was offered the job. So I'd always had at the back of my mind a desire to run a business myself rather than be a director of within the business. So that did appeal to me, and I was able to keep the franchise whilst also becoming a managing director of the UK network. Um, so I did keep that franchise for another, what was it, year and a half, 2.5 years actually. So we sold it at the end of 2019 to Jonathan, who works for me. He runs the business still today and doing very well, thank you, which was great. Um, so, he was able to buy a business he understood. I was able to sell it to somebody that I trusted and liked. So everyone was a winner in that respect. And then I could focus on just building and growing the EweMove network um, ever since. Well, I mean, since 2017, it's kind of tripled in size since then.
Yeah, and so you took that role, and obviously you had a certain amount of challenges having your own business, and obviously you had associates, and obviously doing the job itself day to day. Then you sort of take the managing director role. How did the challenges change from sort of your sort of smaller business to then running with the bigger company? How have your challenges sort of changed day to day with that in mind?
So yeah, the challenge of running a franchise, Chris, is you get people who buy a franchise who are quite entrepreneurial and have been quite senior in their previous occupations, or they might have run their own businesses and they've got their own way of doing things. And what you're trying to do then is funnel those people into a franchise model where there is a set plan and a set way of doing things. So you kind of balancing, removing their individual entrepreneurial spirit, but you don't want to lose that. And you're trying to funnel it into a set process. So there is a balance there between keeping people's personalities and styles, but also staying true to the brand and delivering the service proposition that we promise in our marketing. So people that followed the plan did very well. People that didn't follow the plan didn't do quite so well. So that was a challenge to really understand, well, why people are doing things differently to the way I used to do it. What do I learn from that? And what can we do to reshape or refine the proposition to try and ensure that everyone is successful and everyone's following the plan and delivering, that kind of consistency of product and service. And that is a challenge for any franchisor. I mean, the British Franchise Association, has lots of different franchise businesses in their number. And when you go and meet other franchisors, they all say the same thing, that why do franchisees come and buy a franchise and then try and change it from the inside? It doesn't really work. So that was a challenge. But then the beneficial challenges that we had were, well, okay, let's really refine what does work really well, and you know build an even stronger franchise proposition so it's clearer, easier to train in, easier to learn, easier to deploy, so that future franchisees coming on after me had a better chance of success and a quicker route to success as well. So, where I experienced those first few months of, chaos and not really sure what I was going to be doing, and then trying to work out what I should do to be successful, we can now give that to people on a plate on day one, and they can just crack on and get on with it. So that's a really significant change in terms of helping people find success very quickly.
I always find that crazy that people, pay for a franchise and they pay for kind of like the winning formula sort of thing, and then they kind of go, "Well, actually, I've got a better idea. I've got,
Yeah.
E equals MC 32," and it's like, no, no, no. There's a winning formula. We've set it in place. We've done the hard work. We've done the labor. We've made the mistake, sort of thing. And this is the winning formula we've got. And we kind of, you're joining the gang. You don't need to kind of reinvent the wheel. We've done that for you already.
Yeah, that's right. And, I often talk to franchisees about, different approaches to marketing. And you could argue that any bit of marketing, regardless of whether it's fantastic or absolutely really poor, every single bit of marketing works. So there's lots of things that we don't do on purpose because the marketing we do deploy works better, and it has a better ROI. So it doesn't mean that somebody's idea is completely binary in terms of that's not going to work. Well, it will work, but it won't work as well as what we do. So the challenge for me is to say to somebody who's got some really good ideas, and it might be the best marketing approach for the industry they've come from, but it isn't necessarily going to work in agency. So it's about saying, okay, it's a good idea that will work to a degree, but it's not going to work as well as what we suggest that you should do. And we know that because we've tried all of those other things. So we kind of laser focused on the things that give the best ROI for our franchisees.
Yeah, I was looking at the stats the other day, which is not doesn't sound a very exciting thing to look at on the internet, but I was looking at the stats the other day for the failure rate for people who start their own business and the failure rate for people who start a franchise. And the franchise, I mean, the survival rate is fantastic compared to people who kind of go alone and go, actually, I just want to start my own business and start my own estate agency business. You know, the fact of joining a franchise who's got a winning formula, the survival rate is so much better.
Yeah. And even on conversions, I mean, we had one of our franchisees, James, down in Bexley Heath. He ran his own letting agency for 6, 7 years. His base costs were £5,000, £6,000 a month. Couldn't break into the sales market because all the different marketing approaches he tried just weren't giving him the traction. So he converted his business, rebranded it all to EweMove. His base costs went down because we were able to package up his suppliers for him in the way that we do. So he was paying probably 20, 25% of his costs that he was paying before. So he could put that money into marketing that worked to build his sales business. And now his business is probably 5 or 6 times the size it once was at a lower running cost. And he's absolutely, buzzing with his business, and he's taken on more stuff and grown it significantly. So whether you're an existing agent who's got a high street shop and, you're doing okay, that's great. Or whether you're a brand new person new to the industry and don't know what you're doing, that's fine. We can support that. Or maybe you've worked in industry before and you want to work for yourself, and you might have been a lead valuer of a business, and you kind of think, well, all the business stuff that happens before the valuation and all the business stuff that happens after the valuation in terms of not just sales process but running a business, we can support people with that. So regardless of who you are and the place you've come from, we absolutely add value to somebody's future fortunes, that's for sure.
And James is doing such a good job. He was a guest on the podcast a few months ago, so that episode is obviously available to find as well. So talk me through, if I looked at the top UMove franchises throughout the UK, so if I, off the top of my head, if I think of the Barnstables, the Beestons, the Basingstokes, the Bexley Heath, you don't have to start with B just to be a top UMove franchise, apparently.
Yeah.
What are they doing that is really making them a cut above the rest, do you think?
They are absolutely focused on sales management of themselves and the people who work for them. So again, this has got nothing to do with estate agency, nothing to do with property. If you are in a sales and marketing business, which we are in, every estate agent is, you have to have good sales management processes of yourself and of the people who work for you. End of advice. That's it. It's the sales business. So if you don't get a sale today, you got to make damn sure you get one tomorrow, because time is the most perishable commodity that we have. And you can't be left at the end of the day having wasted a day without gaining traction. So sales focus is the key to success. And it is the case in any industry. You can be probably not as good of a natural salesperson as the next guy, but if you have a process and you engage in sales conversations regularly and more diligently than the naturally good salesperson, you will outperform them.
So let's talk about culture at businesses. So UMove has got a fantastic culture, and I think you talk to any franchisee, anyone at head office, their hugs, kisses, how are you, mate? Everyone's super friendly. Everyone's sort of very much aligned to sort of the UMove way. How, over such a large group of people, do you keep that culture going? Because you've got such a range of personalities there. How do you kind of keep that core belief in sort of UMove and the model going forward?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it doesn't happen by accident. It takes a lot of time and effort, and it's through contribution of the franchisees and people within the network, as well as those at the sheep pen, the head office. So, we have our community Facebook page called Flockbook, and people are contributing to that all of the time, asking questions, providing answers. We have lots and lots of webinars where people can drop in and learn about the products that we support franchise with, or sales processes, or whatever else it might be, running your business, building a business plan. We have our quarterly regional meetings as well, so people can get together, as well as the annual conference. So having dialogue with franchisees as often as we can is the key, because it does maintain, that kind of style, the approach, the culture, and all this kind of stuff. And I also have, a group of about a dozen franchisees who I consult with, called my Lambassadors. And, that's great, because these are people who are running the good businesses. There's a mix of relatively new and inexperienced people, a mix of experienced people as well. So it's about saying, right, okay, let's test and trial these things before we roll it out to the network at large to make sure it works and it's going to deliver some good results. So, yeah, we've just got to make sure that everyone is engaged and informed about what we're doing as often as we can.
So you mentioned agents with non-experience there. So if you went on LinkedIn today and did a poll and said, do you need to have estate agency experience to start your own estate agency business? There'd be a bit of a split. There'd be people saying, oh, absolutely, you definitely need to have experience. Or some people are like, no, actually, it's more about the sort of the person and the experience they've got historically. Um, Obviously, you move on board people with no experience. How do we ensure that or what's the benefit, I suppose, of having that non-experience compared to kind of the downfall of having that non-experience?
The experience you need is in sales and service. That's the experience you need. So you could be, a property guru inside out. You could come from a surveying background and be hopeless as an estate agent because you don't have the sales skills. You could be, an estate agent that's been a lead lister for a local independent, but your diary is being filled by other people, and without those other people, you fail. And I've seen that before. So being experienced in agency is probably one of the least important things. The important thing is you're experienced in sales and service, and you've got a brain with which you can learn. So the technical stuff about, how do you do evaluation? How does a sale progress from offer to completion? All this kind of stuff we can train in. That's actually not that difficult. But you need to be able to give your customers confidence, that you know what you're doing. And that's relatively easy to learn, to be quite honest with you. But what's not easy to learn is how to manage people when they're getting stressed and they're under pressure with the move, which is, as we all know, quite a difficult and stressful time for people.
Yeah, I always think of EweMove Swindon. I always think of Joe when anyone says to me about people who have non-experience. So, full disclosure, Joe joined the EweMove. Well, it wasn't Swindon; it was Cirencester back then. Team, and Alex, who was the sort of franchisee at that time, had loads of experience, and Joe had no experience whatsoever. She'd been in the same job for the last 25 years, I
Yeah.
think it was. I think within a year, like she was absolutely thrashing Alex, just absolutely taking him down on the field.
Yeah, and we see this all the time. Like, if I look at the top performers, there's a mix of agents and non-agents in there. And if I look at our lowest performers, there's a mix of agents and non-agents in there. It's not about agency experience. Absolutely is not. And I will argue that all day long for anyone that cares to challenge me on things. It's about the individual's character, their approach, their diligence to following a process, and their ability to engage with consumers from a sales and service conversation perspective.
Let's talk about branding, if that's okay. So, EweMove has a very strong brand, and I read a social media post from someone who I won't name actually, because it's probably a bit unprofessional for you to name. But they were saying, look, they publicly said, I hate EweMove's branding. I couldn't do anything worse than having a sheep on a board outside my property, sort of thing. But clearly, it works. So, talk me through the branding of EweMove. Because obviously, you are head shepherd. You've got your ambassadors. You've got Flockbook. So, like the sheep puns are like 10 to dozen sort of thing. So talk me through the branding of Human and talk me through why it's a very much a Marmite brand.
Yeah, and it's a Marmite brand on purpose. And I don't know if you've read a marketing book called Purple Cow or something similar, which is along the lines of, if you're driving down the motorway from city A to city B, you'll probably go past good a few number of fields of cows, but you won't remember that. But if you drove down the motorway and you saw a cow that was bright purple, you would remember, and you'd tell the people you were meeting when you got where you were going that, guess what I saw today? I saw a field with a purple cow in it. And it would stick in your mind. And it's just that difference that we're looking for all the time. So if you have a brand where you try and appeal to 100% of your potential audience, then you appeal to nobody, because you just become another anonymous brand, and nobody wants that. So if you have a brand that is a Marmite brand, then you will appeal very strongly to a subset of your potential target audience, and you won't appeal to the rest. But that's good, and that's intentional, because unless you believe with your brand you can achieve 100% market share in your market, then have a brand that stands out, because you will never get to 100%. No agent either has reached 100%, because that means there's only one agent in town. That just doesn't exist, does it? So be realistic that you do not want to sell to 100% of your potential customer base. You want to sell to a subset which you identify with a particular demographic, a particular property type and style, where you want to build your agency's reputation and business, and you will then, you know, enable yourself to do that because you will stand out and you will be different. And it's interesting actually that of the agents we have in the EweMove business, they were all reticent about the brand at first because they thought, oh, it's a bit daft. Not sure this is professional enough for me. I'm a very respected estate agent, all this sort of thing. But actually, when they realized how it resonates with consumers, and that's who it's for, it's not for the agent, it's for the consumer. When they realized how it resonates with consumers, they say, right, well, don't change the brand, whatever you do, because it's absolutely hitting the spot. So I don't really care what other agents think about my brand. It's not them I'm trying to talk to. I'm talking to consumers in the towns where we operate, and they love it.
Love that. Right, well, a couple of quick fire questions for you, Nick, just to wrap things up, if that's okay. I know the answer to one of these already, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Right, so let's start with the first one. So, what's one book or resource you think every estate agent should read?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a sort of one that everyone will have heard, but is quite important, and that is Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yeah, I thought you might choose that one actually. That was the first ever book that you recommended that I read in the business world, and it kind of set me on the reading journey. So it was a very good one to start off with. So very good. Uh, what is the biggest misconception people have about EweMove?
That it's cheap.
All right.
So everyone thinks, I'll just expand on that for a second. So everyone thinks because of our brand, it's be like innocent smoothies, whatever. They think that, we're an online agent. I hate that phrase. And therefore we're an upfront fee only like Purple Bricks, or we're cheap, and we couldn't be further from the truth. So actually we're a super high premium, high service brand. Our average fees are probably higher than some of the other traditional brand businesses we have in our group. And we get better sales results than other agents as well. So the reason we keep winning lots of industry awards from consumer feedback and throughput of transactions, and we earn good fees, is because we deliver a super premium service. So that's the problem with the brand, which I would accept, is that at first you think it's cheap and cheerful, but actually it's expensive and very, very good at what it does.
Excellent. And the last question, which I know the answer to this already, how do you like to switch off outside of work?
Cycling.
Yeah, I wonder how many seconds would pass while that one came through. So I thought that one might be the case. Nick, thank you so much for coming on. You've been a brilliant podcast guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Good to speak to you.
Appreciate it.